Konnichiwa, fellow armchair General Samas. This is Gamer1745 here with a new series. Hearts of Iron 4, of course. Black Ice, yes. And as you can sort of tell by the thumbnail and where we are, Japan. It's been quite a while since we played Japan. Sorry. So there's going to be a lot of new stuff in here. I have been informed by Dorku, I think that's how you pronounce his screen name, that the money is sort of here but not yet implemented, so we can ignore that for this playthrough. I was hoping it would be here because it's... I'm not exactly sure how they're going to use it. I've just seen a few screenshots and thingies, and I'm sure they could tell me more, but I don't yet know. Yes, Dan, you are most assuredly are. One of my favorite viewers, Dan is. So is Django, so is Arno, and others. All of you are. I like all of you, but those of you that hang out and post a lot, whether on YouTube or on Twitch, is great. Now, okay, just reading some of the stuff. So let's get started here. This is setup. So, the other thing here is, one of the reasons I got sort of iffy on the second episode that I was playing in so far lost version of this series, and it wasn't well explained, though you can find it, and I don't know if it was there then or not. I don't remember seeing it. Is this is important. Land doctrines. Once you have all of those prerequisites checked off as green, currently we have 3, the rest are red X's. Once you have those, then it enables the sort of traditional World War II doctrine tree. How do I... it looks like there's a bit more here, but I don't know. But this is a serious thing that needs proper balancing. I'm not saying it's imbalanced. It needs to be properly balanced. Again, I'm not saying it is not yet there. We're going to play it and see. That's part of what we do here. It doesn't. When I originally asked, you need to do all of the text, and so you got to get to like here on machine gun technology, you got to get to here on artillery observation aircraft, and you got to get to here on this, and so you got to get to rolling barrage, but you don't have to get like to these two as well. You don't have to get these. You just have to work your way down to here. I think it's partially just you could do checks for all kinds of things, but it's mostly to get through most of the tech trees. In the sense, I like it in that it separates out, and I like to use this, Afghanistan, which we can sort of see as a relatively primitive but independent country, from Germany. You know, they both can't start with the same level of combat techs or doctrines or whatever. So, and this is one thing that's always bugged me about Hearts of Iron from the beginning. If you look here, basically most all of South America does not make its own arms. Down to the point that many of the countries don't even make their own bullets. That's munitions. So that they're importing all of it. And Hearts of Iron 4 has always sucked at handling this. So they are, with Hearts of Iron 4 coming up, to do some arms trade, an actual arms trade. That's what I've always been pushing for. because it's an important thing and a distinguishing thing. So, but like I was saying, it needs to be well balanced, because if you just throw in, you got to go through all these texts, and then, you know, it's a lot more slots to get through, and you don't want to overly penalize minor countries. Okay, we're looking at 101. Yes. Okay, so let's grab that. Do at least 3 of these. Some of these that we gotta go a long ways on, we should sort of focus on. And stormtroopers we need. Ooh, that's a long one. We gotta do that. Don't know why stormtroopers are needed. Most nations did not develop stormtrooper tactics, even throughout World War One, World War Two. But we also need to come over here, which will help all of our research time. Not just 2%, but might as well do that early as opposed to do it late. Get our industry working better. And our resources eventually, because that's what we want to come over and get this better. So, now, we want to build a few more factories, because we are going to need to import a lot of goods, or a lot of resources, I should say, and down here, I think those will be good. Mentioning that, well, let's first fill out our route. Make sure we have. Don't know why uniforms take up metal. Helmets, yeah, that's not that much metal. And it doesn't have to be high quality metal either. Horse equipment, yeah, you know. So what else might we want to get into? Early production here. Mortar teams, machine guns. Trying to get stuff that isn't going to cost us too much. And we are full up on shipping, but what I want to do here is, once if anything becomes unconcentrated. I wish you could have them in production, but have them start blacked out. Probably the way it would be is just to start this focused here. That will help with that. Now, this tells us what we need here. Now, I was playing around with this before, and this is actually not that bad, because we can come over to Manchukuo. For one factory, get 80. So that will completely alleviate our need for steel. Rubber. Since we are going to eventually occupy, likely, Dutch East Indies, let's get it from there. And oil. Let's drop down to a little under, but we'll cover most of the needs there. So, get that going. Now, we founded our own faction already, which I'm not sure, but it's a good idea. But we're going to start over here with spiritual mobilization. I want to get to this extra research slot to deal with some of those doctrines and texts. So we might also grab a couple of these on the path there, but let's get that going. And this lets us know we have... Okay, let's get one... one division training. Let's set that there. I don't want to overstress. I want to build up a reserve of equipment. So do this, and we have these new single sort of summaries of our current small arms, artillery, tank factories, light aircraft shipyards. Our generals present us with an update of our forces in the field, so we can hover over this. We national spirit, small army, small air force, massive navy. We are missing equipment. Okay, submachine guns. Okay, we'll need to do that. Japan really had a real problem with submachine guns. To me, they're some of the easiest things in the world to make. To the point that Jewish resistance movements actually set up, I think it was in Jerusalem? I think it was in Jerusalem, or it was in Tel Aviv, or one of the cities. Literally in a basement of a building, manufacturing copies of Sten guns. That they set up and did that, and with very, very primitive equipment. Obviously, production numbers weren't high. That's part of the issue. One of the weapons they imported was the MG-34, as it's commonly called. It's the Solingen or whatever machine gun that the Germans got, made out of Austria. They imported a bunch of those in like 38 because they were having trouble with theirs. Okay, less than 1,000 pieces of HQ equipment activates a new spirit. Okay, so we need more HQ equipment to get that. Our nation's mood is changing for better or for worse. Political power minus replaced with varied nation. Okay, don't know why we're going to varied, because I think we were rather homogeneous. Well, I guess we do have Korea and Taiwan, but this event. Okay, Japanese. Don't like that the title is being under the or on top of the clipboard. The Japanese Air Force in B-Ice. This event is intended to provide background information on the air arms of the Imperial Japanese Navy and the Imperial Japanese Army, as well as information about how Japanese aircraft work in B-Ice. Both the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had their own air arms during World War II, divided between the two, or the divide between the two. Okay, I guess, and how I would have written it, but then I'm not good with English, as you can all tell. The two ran deep enough that many of the companies that built aircraft were contracted exclusively to one service. In addition to carrier aircraft, the IJN developed its own land-based fighters and bombers. Okay, next. This section is under many different technologies to Hoi 4, and it seems overwhelming at times. Yes. Currently, the Japanese aircraft consists of the following. Bombers, Japanese players will see the historical naming scheme for the tech tree, while other countries will see only their or short designations. It is not recommended or necessary to research all air techs. Only research that you will be producing within the next year. Only produce what you will need if you plan on striking against major powers. An investment in naval bombers and carrier aircraft would be prudent if you plan on waging a long war against China or the Soviet Union. Focusing on fighter and cast would be a better idea. Okay, and yes, since we're on the topic, we can take a quick look here. I think they've done a pretty good job with this. This is sort of the army section. Come over here. This is the naval section down here. This is the famous Zero, the AM or A6M. Their previous monowing plane had fixed landing gear, and some of their other types were only capable, like they said, of land-based operations. And you see the plethora of army types as well. I will say I have no plans on going to war with the Soviet Union while it's at peace with everybody else. We could consider what to do once Germany is at war with it. Let's speed this up. And maybe a bit more. No. Again, you see this daily hang up. That's because of the stress that black ice puts on the engine. Prepare for the 36 Olympics winter. The Olympics were a really major thing happening that year. Even though it was happening in Germany, it was a major thing around the world. Hello, IKB. Ah, good to know. I didn't know that they produced... Do you know what model types they were? You know, what they sort of were like? Sten guns or something else. That's sort of one of the easiest things to make. Poland, I don't think, had a normal submachine gun, you know, in its normal pre-war army. Not remembering any. They used the Browning machine gun and the Browning BAR as their machine guns. What I call the collectors in America call the Radom pistol, which is, I forget the Polish designation for it. Nice 9mm pistol, and of course they also used a version of the Mauser for their rifles. Convenient for the Germans that it was in the German caliber. Okay, yeah, 35 days to get the student movement, so let's grab that. I've just always been very fascinated with small arms. To some degree, I guess it's, you know, what seeing as a kid growing up in the movie, big artillery things going off cool, but often off camera and whatever, but you're seeing guys running around carrying the guns. And it's something I can get my hands on as small arms. You can legally buy artillery pieces so long as they've been deactivated. I have to really wonder, what do they really care if I owned a Pac 40 if it worked or not? It's owning the ammunition, that's the critical bit, and but not owning the gun. But even if I could own a Pac 40 or couldn't, too expensive. But I can own a Luger or a Mauser or something like that. More than 1,000 people. We have already seen this. Okay. Oh, we have Trained Army Command. So that should tell you to build those, which we are. HQ equipment, good. Yeah, Dan, they did have some very good aircraft. The dance show, I don't like this, get away. Japanese aircraft flew very well. It was particularly set up to be long range. The biggest problem is it lacked well, yeah, that's in Texas, Dan. That's almost its own country. So yeah, you can own all kinds of things there. But you still have to get, and you could, I don't know what the California laws would be, but you still have to, because it would be a destructive device under the ATF. And so you'd have to get it registered as a destructive device either way. Yeah. Tanks also are, well, there's actually a regulation, and they changed some years ago about bringing them into the U.S. But you're right, Dan, you can own tanks all day long as much as you want, but they too have to have their weapons, particularly their main weapons, deactivated. And at least from some of the inside interior shots I've seen on some tanks, they've actually taken a welding torch to the back of the breech of the gun and just sort of, or a cutting torch, I should say, and just cut that thing in half. Just cut the back of the breech off. So the barrel and all that is clear, and you can look through it. But without, you know, half of that breech on that barrel, there's no way to stop that, you know, fire it and keep with the recoil inside. So it's just, you know, deactivated. So it's just a big tractor. I was yesterday reading a story about a guy, in Colorado, who had a small muffler shop chain, and sold off some of his other smaller shops. Still had his one, and then the local town council changed the zoning because another business wanted to have the land, and he refused to sell, or said his price was too high to put him out of business. So then put him out of business. So he built an armored shell for his tractor, and then went on a rampage around the town, running over buildings and things. So in essence, a tank. Let me just, I know we're watching this, but I'm going to come up here and open like a new tab. I'm interested. Cool, thanks. I'm going to bookmark that and read that later. Thanks, IKB. I'm always interested in small arms. And the point to interrupting an episode, yes. Okay, so National Focus Student Movement, great. On the 26th of February, a group of young military officers attempted a coup d'etat. The radical Kodu Ha faction of the military assassinated several prominent politicians, but failed to assassinate the prime minister. The coup failed, and unlike in the aftermath of the previous attempted coup, the surviving perpetrators were given secret trials and shot. Yeah, earlier, and I think approximately a year earlier, they killed off a rather change popularity in fascist. Move radical factions in the IGA. So I want to look at this quickly. Okay. So there. So stability. So we're gonna gain. We're not gonna have this lack of stability here. Okay. Good. They killed the prime minister. So that is a worrying thing. And how disrupted Japan was. That's cool, Dan. That is really cool. Love to have a Sherman. Okay, the Winter Olympics closing ceremony. Now, how is the audio doing, everybody? I've got a new boom arm hooked to the microphone, so it's much closer to my mouth. Okay, mood is nationing, changing, remove. Okay, so we are adding homogeneous nation. Good. Okay, we can now modify the government, and with all of those okay, so we can see here, what am I doing? Come over here. Well, actually just here we can see 77 days, 20 days, 189 days. Let's put him in military theorist. And we can see 72, 19, hardly any big change, 177. So that will help get through those texts faster. Okay, 2 research slots opened up. So, we also want to grab that, which will help roll research time. And now with the new national focus. Yeah. Well, no, we're going to wait on some of those. Let's get that going. You see, here's a thought here, and don't know if any of the black ice. You need to unlock these to open up the World War II technology levels. Okay, I get it, but I would submit to you, everyone, that Japan, throughout all of World War II, never had tank or infantry, tank, and artillery coordination. I may be wrong about that, because obviously they did use tanks in China. They did use them on the islands, but those were very limited and sort of, you know, mobile pillbox type things, not necessarily a coordinated thing. And I don't really, quite honestly, I can't really say that I know anything about you know, their warfighting techniques well enough on land in the use of tanks. So I don't, you know, I guess I would open up certain certain developmental tracks based upon what you have researched. And obviously, if we're going for the German developmental track for World War II, that would need tank and infantry coordination opened up, because that's very much what they were doing. Yeah, it's better now that we got one more slot to get through all these. Offensive prepared fire. Okay. Continuous artillery fire. Because, well, trying to think how much. I can quite honestly say I don't know a whole lot about Japanese fighting tactics in World War II. Okay. The Abyssinian War, the Ethiopian War is over, and Italy won. Wow, what do you know? How are we doing for resources? Okay, only down 3 for aluminum. We are up on everything else. That's good. Actually, let's cut back the oil. We're too far ahead. Let's cut back 1 from America. No, not 2, just 1. Oh, well, no, let's cut back a full 1 here. Why is that delivered 12? And we're going to up this by 1. Yeah. There we go. Get out from under the U.S. needs. Okay, we're going to expand this once more so that we can continue to buy things like more oil. Yes, they definitely used a lot of wave tactics, Dan, and how do I some of my knowledge comes from movies, and we know how accurate or inaccurate movies can be, but they do give us some sense. And you're right, you know, bombard then advance. They did a lot of night harassings, especially against the Allies. I've read descriptions of Chinese battle tactics in which most soldiers didn't fight. This was from Stilwell, observing some stuff in China before, when he was there as part of the U.S. Diplomatic staff, well before World War II started, like in 37 or something. And he was watching some of the stuff where they would move up fairly large infantry formations, battalions, companies, whatever, and they'd sort of march to within sight of the front lines and then just sit down. Everybody would just sit there and watch. And where the artillery would be firing at each other, the machine guns would be shooting at each other, but mostly the troops themselves didn't do anything. And this is just your standard stuff, and I think a lot of it is a pure lack of training, lack of supplies as in ammunition, and that type of thing. Now, there were some really good Chinese divisions that were trained mostly by the Germans, but those got destroyed around the fighting for Nanking. So Japan definitely had the warrior spirit, the advancing into the enemy spirit, but there's still a lot of tactical questions that I don't have. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, and so I'm just, because I'm trying to think, I just can't really definitively point to things that I've read or watched that I would put as authoritative, as opposed to just like I say, movies and other impressions that I have. Okay, civilian infantry construction. We're going to be switching more over to military factories very soon. Okay. Armaments organizer Kishi. He was one of the main guys. Civilian small arms factory construction speed. Okay, let's go with him. Oh, patriotic Brit, good to see you. So let's get to here. That will get MG infantry coordination, and it's things like this that I know quite a bit about the U.S. tactics. Know quite a bit about the German, platoon level tactics for the war, as well as a fair amount about the British. Just Japan, I'm sort of making presumptions on. Okay, expand. Let's now reinforce Soviet border. Yeah, let's grab that. Be a quick one. Oh well, what do we need? We need machine guns, or submachine guns. And now we need more oil. Maybe I shouldn't have quit the U.S. trade deal. Yeah, it might have been a mistake, but let's come over here to Iran and pick that up. Now we have a, well, one of these over here. And we will assign now we have a bunch of this command power slowly building up here. So we could spend it on something, not much that we have available, but we could do reinforcement rate or division recovery rate. I like division recovery rate better. That will help keep up the offensive. There we go. Not currently planning on attacking the Soviets until at least we see a Germany go into war with them, and then we will hey ads. Then we will evaluate a northern option. On its own, I think it's stupid to do so. Okay, yes, reinforce the Soviet border. Russians and their Mongol lapdogs detected the buildup of our troops in the Heilongjiang and attempted to launch a large raid across the border to disrupt our preparations. Fortunately, our quick-thinking commanders caught their forces in a pincer movement. We inflicted severe losses on their forces before they fled across the border. Great. Okay, so manpower minus, army experience plus. Okay, research bonus once we get to the grand battle plan. Great. And our construction has improved, which will allow us to get excavation. So I wanted construction too, but okay. Naval dockyards, military factories. Let's go, because long lead time, we're going to go with Mitsubishi. Not much adds. We just sort of started, got going. Okay, Japan has picked its United Front. I don't know, I'm presuming this is a national focus thing, even though we have not yet even threatened to attack. Okay, yeah, they're all joining the National Front. Now we have up here let's see if we can get a good commander who is no, not jungle rats, winter specialist, maybe offensive doctrine. Okay, well, he's an infantry officer. I don't know, reckless samurai lineage, offensive doctrine. Okay, he'll be. That'll do for our cavalry arm. Cavalry arm. No problem, ads. Yes, yes, naval invasions as well. Once we get anywhere near it, we're still in 36, so no point in pushing anything yet. Spanish Civil War erupts. Okay, and we also have the ability to expand our system here now. Let's take a quick look. We need to actually close that, but we're going to be going for that and that. So it won't be until 37, 38. So we don't need to focus on that just yet. Here, big field. You know, these are all sort of really cool and nice and graphic, but I do sort of like the everything fits in a window of Hearts of Iron 3. I would go with smaller graphics or be able to zoom in and zoom out. That'd be good. I'm going to suggest that. I'm going to suggest that. Yeah, I'm going to have some limited armored formations as Japan, but I am not planning on making a large mechanized army. Combination of the oil needs and just who I'm going to be facing. China, I think, we'll be able to take down, and everybody else's limited fronts. Just looking to see where I'm going to be doing most of my research the soonest. We'll do some. We could do even get going some medium tanks there fairly soon. So let's go with this. Yeah, that would be interesting, Britt. We were just talking a little bit about my lack of knowledge of the Japanese battle doctrines. It would be something that, if well researched and done, and in my opinion, well, one thing that I quite honestly don't like too much about the current sort of system is that with the normal doctrines is you just sort of pick your path and you go down it, and it's very linear. Where I can sort of agree that the idea of the Hearts of Iron 3 path, where you sort of get to research everything, you know, human wave and this and that, you know, all the stuff for Germany, which, yeah, I don't know that Germany did human wave tactics. And so that I like the idea with Hearts of Iron 4 that not everyone can do everything. But I also I think it's gone too far the other way, and I also think it's gone too far in the sense that you can't improve on a particular tactic over time by putting more research into it to have levels within each you know, tactical abilities. So somewhere between the two, I think, would be the ideal solution. Don't really know that there's the I-400 capabilities. I haven't even looked. Yes, generally speaking, Edge, we're going to go the southern route. That would be a good plan when facing against particularly the Western allies in the U.S. I know with the AA. But we will be eventually fighting the Americans, ads, or Arno, I should say. But no, yeah, ads sort of. Yeah, we're gonna get there. Okay, Five Ministers Conference was a meeting between 5 important Japanese ministers. Well, I'm glad that they had the right number of ministers to match the name, in which they laid out a plan for Japanese expansion. It was decided to expand southwards into China and other parts of Asia. The Soviet Union was not ignored, however, and in part of this plan was also to build a large enough army to be able to defeat the Soviet Union. Foreign Minister Arita generally approved of the plan, but stressed the importance of maintaining the goodwill of the United Kingdom and the United States. Prime Minister Horita agreed with the plan and decided to let the Army or Navy draw up detailed plans. Now, okay. Now, I talked a little bit about this last week, but since I am not going to be showing those episodes, they're still there, but I haven't put them up yet. Don't know if I ever will. So, a couple of important points that I think need to stress there. How do I put this? Hello, ProTime Polly. Good to see you. is, we as war gamers, and I put most all of the viewers into that group, often look at things in the abstract. And nations, to a point like the U.S., also look at things in the abstract, because outside of a civil war, the War of 1812, and the Mexican-American War, mostly we don't fight in our own national territory. So we have no idea where or when we're going to be fighting next time. So that we sort of look at theories and the abstract and do it. Where national defense institutions, which could be something sort of like each nation's war ministry or defense ministry is what I'm talking about, and their specific armies and navies and air force, really look at maintaining their nation. I guess a good example would be Sweden. It's been a month or two now, but I read some articles on how Sweden is really re-up-arming. So that they have to, Sweden has been up-arming recently. There was, and those of you who looked around, sorry, I'm just getting me distracted here. So Sweden, those of you who are old enough to remember that there was the Cold War going on, NATO and Warsaw Pact. Some of you are on either side of that border that lived through that. And we were all sort of grimly aware that war could break out at any moment. Then there was the peace dividend. And so many nations disarmed, stopped buying new arms, various things like that. Now, with Russia's recent activity, particularly in Ukraine, a lot of nations are reevaluating its armament stances. And Sweden is one of them. And it is very quietly, it's the socialist government, is pushing towards better military relations with the United States. Has, from the articles, no intention of joining NATO, but is particularly with the United States, not as much with the other NATO powers. I'm not saying not with them, but particularly with the United States, trying to coordinate national defense policies. And so Sweden has tunnels along its coast that can take submarines into them. It's very focused on defending Sweden. Its air bases, have, they're hardened air bases to put aircraft in them to survive first strikes. And I know what you're saying, ads about the U.S. Isolationist policies, but which is interesting, and I do very much understand that. But Sweden is working with increasing real life pro-time poly. Sweden is looking at increasing cooperation with the U.S. So you can talk about the U.S.'s isolationism, but they're not counting on the U.S. isolationism as the reason for their up-arming. They're looking at real-world practical sense that things can shift rapidly, and too rapidly for the U.S. to be able to. The idea that that the U.S. could just deploy one division to Sweden and stop a Russian invasion isn't realistic. And so there is no realistic way for say there was a rapid occupation of Finland and then some sort of move into Sweden, there's no realistic way for the U.S. to prevent an invasion of Sweden. We can, send a brigade, an air mobile brigade, and get some, fly in some stuff to join the fight. But we're not going to be able to protect Sweden. So they're looking at defending Sweden. The defense ministry and the army, they may send expeditionary forces as part of the United Nations, particularly like they did down in the Congo, down in the 60s. Sweden may deploy its military well away from Sweden, but its primary defense is Sweden, and that's what they focus on. And they do things like I was saying, not secret, everyone knows where they are, but hardened submarine bases in the sides of cliffs on the ocean that they can move submarines in them that might be able to survive a nuclear strike or something like that. And so that they do that kind of stuff. Now get to Japan. The world in 1936 is not what the world is today in various elements. And people viewed things differently. But part of this and I'm getting a long way around to this, but Japan, and they've watched China, okay? They didn't, I don't think, watch so much China in the Shogunate era, but after 1868, with the opening up and starting of the Meiji period, they watched what was happening in China. In fact, they participated in what was happening in China, meaning the foreign penetrations into China. They were part of it. The sort of movie, but also the sort of famous 55 Days at Peking. There were Japanese troops as in both the held out, garrison, foreign consulate area garrisons in Peking, and it was just the foreigner legation areas. They weren't occupying a whole city, at least not at that time. And they were part of the relief force that came in from Tenzin. So they were very much, this isn't like some mysterious, did they have anybody watching? They were part of what was going on in China. They took very seriously, and I can't stress this enough, very seriously, the responsibilities of a national government. What is the responsibilities of the national government? The first and foremost responsibilities of any national government is to protect the nation. You can't do anything else if you can't protect the nation. Now, some nations just sort of give up on this because Luxembourg can't protect itself. It's just an impossible. I've not read the book, Patriotic Brit. I do know it. I have read or watched movie adaptations. So, H.G. Wells is a very complicated man, and I could go into him and some of his beliefs and theories and practices. And he is, in some ways, I would say, on the evil side of things. His sort of progressivism, Wellsism, isn't necessarily very good. But, so obviously, Luxembourg can't defend itself. It can't maintain itself. But many nations can look at, let's say like Taiwan is a good modern day example. China wants Taiwan, wants it. Maybe it would, if it was some sort of absolute trade Tibet for Taiwan, and you could only ever have one of them, not somehow we could keep one and then strategize to get the other. But obviously there aren't zero-sum games in real life. But if it was like one or the other, you could have Tibet or you could have Taiwan. I think they would pick to have Taiwan. The Republic or People's Republic of China would pick to have that. But Taiwan just needs to be, now it's part of, more loosely than others because of various things, been part of the Western defense policy against the spread of communism, so that if the People's Republic were just to simply invade, that might mean war with more strategic. You may be right, ads. I'm not sure, and as I was saying this, I wasn't absolutely sure, but it really seems more emotionally tied, nationalistic tied than to a strategic. I get your strategic points and possible resources and other things for Tibet. But I think it comes down to more core national territories. I think I think the way that the Chinese government sees this as if an equal size province was still independent in what they consider, core national territory. That's how I'm viewing this. You're right that it has more strategical importance, but right now, even if there isn't, shall we say, a going to war with response for the invasion of Taiwan, Taiwan maintains very strong securities in that they have sort of defense drills in which everybody gets off the street, everybody goes inside, and I know some of this was they recently had one during the big Computex convention going on that a lot of Westerners were in Taiwan. So they are highly militarized and they only need to be militarized enough to make it unreasonable, not impossible, not incapable, but just unreasonable for the People's Republic to invade and take them over. You just have to be good enough, defensive enough to do that. So, so if you want to be America and promote freedom and liberty and all of that stuff as a core national belief, but that doesn't work if you can't defend yourself. If you want to be the Soviet Union and have socialism, if you can't defend yourself, you can't have socialism. Nothing else can follow on from not being able to defend yourself. So Japan is looking at the world and seeing that it's vulnerable and how to deal with it. They had the beginning of the century, they had a major war with Russia. They are looking at this. So they look at the world and see a dangerous place, a place in which Asian nations, partially for racists, but mostly because if you really look at a lot of European views, including, I'm going back to some of the 18th century, sorry I'm not reading much of the chat right now, ads. I do see something about China and mercantilism up there, but you look at some of the 18th century understanding. I'm getting this mainly from Britain. Now they had the most contact with Asia, or particularly the Orient of Asia, past India. Of course, there's a racist element to it, just because that's sort of the way they viewed the world, but it really isn't so much a negative. They didn't see it as a primitive world. They saw it as a sort of a mysterious, other developed world. And so, that's, so it isn't at its core a racist viewpoint. They saw, the primitives down here in, Indonesia, and obviously once they started encountering more and more down the primitive people down in Australia. But it wasn't finding a primitive world or like in Africa or wherever. They found a very, very well-developed world, in some ways technologically behind the West, particularly in military fighting techniques and shipbuilding and other things. But it wasn't, they didn't see it as primitive, but they did see it as vulnerable. And so Japan wants to make itself invulnerable. I don't think, at least, and again, I don't read enough Japanese to, it's so little, and what I have is so rusty now. But I really don't get the idea that they were wanting to do imperialism or world domination aspects like we see in Germany, wanting to have great, huge amounts of territories for the German people. A little bit in the way of sort of Italy wanting to rebuild the Roman Empire in, a greater sphere of different peoples involved in it. but they were really wanting to try to make a bulwark in Asia to protect themselves. So I understand that. It wasn't expansionism purely for expansionistic sake. It was for developing a bulwark, a protected situation, in that they were going to protect themselves and I will say this very clearly, often at the expense of others. Meaning this wasn't like, we're going to protect ourselves and the other people too, and we're all going to... No. You look at Japan's occupation of Korea. It was all in favor of Japan at the expense of the Korean peoples. It wasn't that they were going out of their way to be brutal to the Korean peoples. It wasn't that they wanted to harm the Korean peoples. But no, we're doing it the Japanese way. It's for Japan. It's for the promotion of Japan. And yeah, also the Koreans are there too. And so... it's that sort of a thing. Again, it's not an altruistic, wanting to help other Asian powers against the evil Westerners. Hell, they were very, very much on board, like I was saying earlier, with penetrating China. They were very much on board with being partners with the Western powers in other things in Asia. That was good for them. During the post-World War I era, there were various embargoes against selling arms in China, especially in the 1920s for military arms. Civilian arms you could sell in there. Obviously, and we know, big military arms did make it into China. But most of the arming of China by the West, Mauser selling the Mauser pistols, Astra and others selling copies of them, and many other things like that going on, it was done through Japanese middlemen. They would buy the European-made arms in most cases, ship it to some other port, often in Japan, and then ship it into China. It was the Western arms trade into China, and then once the 30s came around and some of the lifting came off of it, a lot of the stuff that was arming Chiang Kai-shek's army was coming in, shipped in via Japan. A lot of the Czech machine guns and all that stuff was coming in through arms merchants that were Japanese arms merchants as the middleman. That was the primary way, not the exclusive way, but the primary way of arms getting into China at the time was via Japan. And so and so they were and it was purely a profit motive situation. And so they were very willing to work with the Western powers. And they saw themselves in one way or another, and now they, like we say, very sort of a racist viewpoint as well within Japan, as well as China, as we've discussed earlier. China is still sort of the middle kingdom, and the middle kingdom means the middle between heaven above and earth, the rest of the world below. They see themselves as above the rest of the peoples in the world. It's not both in Japan and in China, it's not the sort of Ku Klux Klan, we hate some other people racism, but just sort of their racial ideas. And I would submit very much from my contacts that many Japanese and Chinese still have variations of these racial ideas today. Now, so that's very important to the Japanese thinking here. And as I'm saying all this, maybe you can also cue in the idea here that they wanted to keep the goodwill of the United Kingdom and the United States. The United Kingdom particularly, because up until 1940, particularly for Japan, the biggest influencer is sea power, and the biggest navy in the world is Britain. So they know that the navy that they fear the most in the world is the British Navy. In 1936, 37, 38, that's who they fear. I'll get to the chat in a bit, guys. But so they fear the British Navy the most. And they realize it can be combined with the French Navy, the American Navy, or somebody else to make a grant. That's who they fear as an influence, because their Navy, they see it, if it works well, can protect it from any sort of, land battles, because you can't have a land battle in Japan without getting past the Navy. So that's what they see as an important element. Now, the question comes down to is, and the United States does have a significant navy, but it alone isn't, at this time in their viewpoint, isn't seen as something that could defeat Japan. Now, can you have an expansionist power in Asia and maintain the goodwill of the United Kingdom and the United States? That is the interesting question. Now, those two nations, even though they both have United in their name, have very different policies and goals, not just in Asia, but everywhere. The U.S. policy I'll go into first wants an open door policy, and I'm using the sort of what they talked about with China, but generally speaking, wants the idea of capitalist world exchange, which is sort of free exchange of goods and ideas. Generally speaking, not militarily aggressive. Trust me, the U.S. government doesn't like the idea of the British Empire in India. Now, they're not hostile to it in the sense that they want to subvert it, but they aren't like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, Britain should rule India. No, that's not the way America views things. Now, they want India to be a Western influenced, shall we say, nation, one in which Western peoples, powers, economics, whatever, can trade with some place like India or Indonesia, or pick your region of the world. They want that, and they realize that, yeah, probably the deep jungles of Borneo, very primitive people, or in New Guinea, headhunters and cannibals and whatever, probably they should have some sort of Western control over them, whether it's some sort of League of Nations or UN type protectorate, whether it's an official territorial colony, or some sort of, like the Philippines, a protectorate. They probably would generally, especially with a bad behaving primitive people, should have some sort of Western, like I say, influence over them. But the idea of starting major wars of conquest is an anathema to the U.S. And it's ideological. It's in sort of our fundamental elements of the way we view the world, that's bad. Okay, so the U.S. isn't going to like territorial gains in China or anywhere else. They will very much accept a passive-aggressive foreign policy. And by this is sort of how the original Roman Empire, to a degree, would be formed. Sort of like, one of the, I don't know if it came back. I don't know if it's up here. One of the sort of legation cities the nationalist Chinese took over. It wasn't, Shanghai or Hong Kong or whatever, but it was one of them. They came in and took over and killed a bunch of Europeans as part of it. I don't mean part of it, killed them as in the fighting over it, as in marching in and whatever, battle with the local warlords at the time. This is like in the 20s or something. 27 maybe, I don't know, forget, and I'm sort of forgetting about the details of it. But it was one of the coastal legation cities, and it was more than just, again, the fighting that some Europeans died in. It was sort of post taking it over, taking people out and shooting them, because the nationalist Chinese, especially in their early days, were very anti-Western. They were, it was the humiliation of China that they were worried about. Sorry, I'm going to shift my chair here a bit. There we go. That's a little better. It was emotional as well as, foreign influence and various things. And they were very willing to use killing. Well, I'm trying to not just use violences and to overcome armed resistance, but instead of saying arresting everybody, putting them on, they used a lot of river traffic on, river boats, or putting them on trains and shipping them out, of just shooting people or hacking them apart, or other sort of, post control, meaning after you control these people, of killing them. And you could argue, well, hey, they're doing that to the Chinese people, so why wouldn't they do that to the Western peoples there? Well, the Chinese people, how do I put this? They didn't have a different army protecting them. Where the Western people, oh, they've got the British Army and Navy. They got the American Army and Navy. You got the French Army and Navy. You got, Japan they got the Japanese Army and Navy. You kill their citizens, then, you've now pissed off an outside group that has the ability to. No, it wasn't Beijing. I'm talking not the 55 days at Peking. It was a be patriotic person there. It was a coastal city, and I forget what it was. I don't think it was Tientsin. It was another sort of coastal port city I'm thinking of. I just was reading about the United States Marines, the China Marines. Operations in in China, and I think it was in like 27 a large I forget, the third brigade or regiment, or the 3rd regiment or the 4th regiment, something, one of them getting deployed to China. And they were talking about what happened and then what they feared. It was initially to Shanghai they got employed, because the nationalist Chinese army under Chiang Kai-shek was advancing towards Shanghai, and they were very much afraid of mass murders of the very large population of Westerners in Shanghai. And so, this is why Westerners traditionally have gotten more protection than the Chinese citizens, is not because they're better or more valuable or whatever than the Chinese people is that they have outside nations backing them up. And it's sort of, if you want to take away all their property and you want to kick them out of the country, fine. You do that. But you don't need to then, once you control the situation, to go then and kill them, even if you consider what they did. Unless you can really put them up for individual crimes. That's a different thing. But if you can't put them up for individualized crimes, you just go, yeah, okay, you're out of here. You're done. But nationalist revolutionary type movements, like you see what the really stupid move by the Iranians when they took the U.S. Embassy hostage. They should have just simply surrounded that embassy and said out. And allow the U.S., never take it, never even storm it, and allow them to leave peacefully. If you want the U.S. out, fine. But by doing that, they have set up many, many years of direct hostility between Iran and the U.S. by it. Now, of course, blowing up a Marine barracks in Lebanon, that didn't help either. And that was an Iranian operation, if you don't realize that. So Iran has been at war with the U.S. on a low-level basis for a long time now. So, you have the idea here that had the Japanese then moved into China post taking one of these legation cities to restore order, and then de factoly, once you get in there, set up Japanese administration around a greater protective area. Notice all the types of words I'm using. The U.S. could go for that, because if they see chaos in the world, it's sort of like right now, if a nation wants to have some extra land, they can go into Somalia. The U.S. isn't going to do much about it, because Somalia is in chaos. This part up here is actually running pretty well, Somaliland. I would say that's because it was a British colony. Now, maybe there's a massive cultural difference between these people that were in Italian Somaliland versus British Somaliland, but I don't really think so, natively, locally. I think this was administered by the British, and these people got a few generations of British administration, so they're running themselves nicely once national Somalia fell apart, and no one, I don't think, recognizes them as an independent country. This is Puntland over here, somewhere else in there, the ones that were doing all the pirating, and maybe still are, I don't know, of ships, but Somaliland, and they went back to sort of the British, without saying British Somaliland, it's just Somaliland is what they call themselves, and they're trying to get international recognition. Saudi Arabia almost sort of recognizes them, and they print their own money, they're running their thing. There's no Al-Shabaab, no terrorism going on. It's most of their cities, you can be a Westerner and walk peacefully down the street. I'm not saying there's zero violent crime or anything like that, but it's running pretty good compared to Mogadishu and these other areas that are an ongoing civil war to this day. So if somebody, doesn't have to be a Western as in European or European culture nation, it could be just somebody else. If they wanted to set up a protectorate, I don't think the U.S. is going to squawk too much, because this is, a failed state. This is something that doesn't work anymore. Now, if they come in and, so let's say if it's India wants this territory for some reason, and they're calling it Africa India or West India or I don't know, whatever, and nationalizing it, they might sort of balk at it. But if it's just the Indian Protectorate Zone of Africa, an administrative region or something like that, the U.S., depending on the exact president and whatever, but it isn't fundamentally against the idea of bringing order to chaos that the U.S. is against. But naked aggression, and particularly in a large way, the U.S. is against. So I don't think massive expansion is ever going to get U.S. Goodwill, keeping it. Now, to the United Kingdom, this is a different situation. United Kingdom, and I don't have a good map right now, and I can't specify, but had set up with France and a few other powers. Germany, by this time, is now out of it, but including set up with Japan, to have regions of economic interest within China. So it's sort of already divided China up after a fashion. And not so much for political control, which faction controls it, but more for economic interest. And so long as you allow British economic activity to happen, they're fine. And so long as you generally, if you have a civil war, battles, it gets taken care of pretty quickly. Britain's pretty okay with what's going on. Now, Japan definitely has goals for expanding outside of it. Now, the next question comes in for British goodwill, maintaining it. Where can you go, expand to, and maintain British goodwill? To Dutch colonies? Now, Britain's going to complain about that. That's not going to happen. French colonies? Britain recently, in the last 100 years or so, has been having a pretty good alliance with France. Yeah, they're not going to like that either. The U.S. can sort of take care of itself for the Philippines, but still, they wouldn't like that too much. And of course, obviously, British-held possessions like Australia and New Zealand, whether you domestic or whether they're locally controlled or nationally controlled. So it really starts to come down as to where you're going to expand that the United Kingdom is going to maintain its goodwill. Yeah, Manchukuo and some of these northern spots up here, maybe grab off some of the Soviet Union territory. So a northern expansion, I could see, especially against the Soviet Union, could be an expansion direction that Britain would accept. Unfortunately, some of the key resources, particularly oil and rubber, are down in territories that would clearly come afoul of British interests. So I sort of kind of see this is sort of a pure wishful thinking that you're going to have the expansion that you're going to have and maintain the goodwill of the United States and United Kingdom. And so, let's see, unlocks the northern expansion route, which we don't want to do. Now that, like I say, that would probably be the best to keep their goodwill. But I don't know whether this is really set up as a possible join the Allies, or sort of be a different faction. Because we go to, what is it, faction map. Be their own faction, but sort of like the Soviet Union's its own faction, but being allied with the Allies faction against the Axis and the Comintern. That would be an interesting path to go down. But it's what I don't think can easily be done. So we're going to unlock the Navy plan, and it does have, and which gets back to the point of, since you didn't maintain the goodwill of the United Kingdom and the United States, and I don't think Manchukuo has enough steel, and I don't think the Far East of the Soviet Union here has enough steel. Maybe it does. No, maybe it does. Yeah, it probably does. It has enough steel. I'm now evaluating if these numbers are correct. And somebody has done good work for the numbers for Hearts of Iron 4 and some of these things. But that has enough steel. So yes, if you could get this part of, it has enough aluminum steel. So it's short of rubber and oil. This is a good path to go. The question is you become vulnerable to economic warfare of embargoes and such if you don't do this. But we're going to do this. And on that long twisting tale to get there, we're going to end this episode. I want to thank you all for watching. Thank you for liking the videos. And please post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas, corrections. Love hearing from you. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.